I'll be reacting to some of the things that happened in week 8 of this college football season. So I wasn't really surprised that Georgia beat Texas. Like I said in that video, that even though I was picking Texas, if Georgia played their best game of the season, they could win this game, and they did play their best game of the season. I was just surprised that they won by as much as they did. They beat Texas on their own field by 15 points, 30 to 15, and really it was over at halftime. They had the lead at 23 to nothing at halftime, and really with Georgia, if they get ahead by even 14 points, they're not going to lose. And what was surprising also in this game was Georgia's defensive line dominated the Texas offensive line, and Texas's offensive line is supposed to be one of the best in the country. And Georgia's defensive line usually before the game yesterday during this season hadn't looked as good as it had the past several years, but Georgia's defense as a whole played really good in that game. They look like their 2021 defense. Now, Georgia's defensive line, I think, partly was playing better in this game because Michael Williams is finally getting healthy, who is probably their best defensive lineman, a player that I've seen could possibly even be a top 10 pick. But Georgia's Jalen Walker has now become one of the best players in college football. The linebacker, he was all over Quinn Ewers in this game. And Georgia's offense, though, actually wasn't great in this game. Carson Beck has really been a little bit of a disappointment this season. He's already thrown 8 interceptions this season, and he only threw 7 interceptions in all of last season. He threw 3 interceptions in that game yesterday, and he's thrown 5 interceptions total in the last 2 games. I guess I can start calling him Carson Turnover Back, and he actually didn't even have that many yards passing in this game. And I was saying before the season began that Carson Beck was going to be the best at quarterback in college football this year, and I almost agreed with that. I thought he'd be probably the second best quarterback behind Dylan Gabriel, but he doesn't even really seem to be a top five quarterback this season. But Georgia's an elite team, and they're no doubt going to make the college football playoff, and I have no doubt that they'll win the rest of their games and go 11-1 and make the SEC championship. And I have no doubt that they'll win whoever uh, they play in the SEC championship. And there are really only games left that you could even call tough would be Ole Miss and Tennessee, which I'm almost sure they'll beat both of them. So the way Georgia's defensive line played in that game, Ole Miss's offensive line, the way it's been looking since they've been playing it against SEC teams, they'll get dominated even worse than Texas did by Georgia. Ole Miss, you can forget about them trying to score a bunch on Georgia. They'll have a hard time even getting first downs on Georgia. And then Tennessee, they haven't been able to score against Georgia with Josh Heupel being their coach, even when they've had a really good offense. And that'll be no different this year because Tennessee's offense actually isn't even very good this year. Georgia under Kirby Smart has recently become a team that underperforms a lot in the games against teams that aren't nearly as talented as them, but they always show up and play great against the really good teams, and they though do always win those games that that they underperform in, but because they just have so much more talent than those other teams that they're still able to win the game. But the only two teams that I would think would have a chance to beat Georgia now would be Oregon and Ohio State. I think Oregon, Ohio State, and Georgia are the three best teams in the country. And Texas, I do wonder though if they were a little bit overrated because they hadn't even played a good team until they played Georgia because Michigan, who they played, they're awful. It turns out they lost again for the third time this season. Yesterday to Illinois by two touchdowns, and then Oklahoma. It turns out isn't any good either. Who Texas played? Oklahoma lost by nearly as much to South Carolina as they did to Texas yesterday. Oklahoma's not even an average team this year, so really that win meant nothing for Texas. Now, Oklahoma looks like they are probably even worse than they were in Brent Venables' first season there when they went only 6-6. Oklahoma, I don't think will even get a bowl game this year. This is a no doubt the uh, worst offense I've ever seen Oklahoma have. It's like non-existent. Their quarterback situation is one of the worst in the country, and then they've got probably the worst offensive line in the SEC. So I think there's a good chance that Georgia could be beating either LSU or Texas A&M in the SEC championship game. And then what's weird is Georgia does seem to be the new dominant program in college football, but they still haven't been able to beat Alabama, who was the dominant program in college football. And it's weird that they weren't able to beat them this time because uh, obviously last year it was understandable why Alabama beat Georgia because Alabama was a really good team. They were a better team than Georgia, and they had Nick Saban. But Kalen DeBoer hasn't even been that good at Alabama. Alabama's not even that good this year. So Georgia clearly seems like a better team than Alabama. So you would have thought that they could beat them. Alabama, I do not think is going to make the college football playoff. This is the first time that I've ever seen Alabama have two losses this early on in the season, and I've been watching college football for a very long time. Alabama's the offensive line, I thought was going to be better this year because even though they had some struggles early on last season, Nick Saban improved them where later on in the season of 2023, they were one of the best offensive lines in the country and actually pushed around Georgia's defensive line in the SEC championship game. And I thought that they would just get better this year, but they actually seem to be more like they were at the beginning of last season. And that is weird because now they're more experienced and they're so talented. Alabama still has a lot of talent on their team, even though some players left because Nick Saban retired, and it kind of seems like DeBoer is wasting all of that talent. Like they've got two really talented running backs, Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, and I thought they would have huge seasons this year, but they're not doing much this year. And then Alabama still has quite a bit back on defense, but their defense actually doesn't even seem to be any good at all this year. Now, I know Tennessee didn't score a lot against them, but Tennessee last year with the offense they have now probably would have just scored 10 points on Alabama. And Milrow, I still think is a good quarterback. It kind of seems like they're wasting him too over there. But Alabama, I think, is going to lose to LSU, which will put them out of the playoffs, of course. I still think they'll beat Oklahoma and Auburn, but even Missouri next week, I think it could be tough for Alabama. And if they lose 4 games, I don't know if Kalen DeBoer will be able to keep his job, even though it's only been one season, because the expectations are so high over at Alabama. And then Southern Cal is horrible this year. Lincoln Riley is no doubt going to get fired. They lost for the 4th time this season to a terrible team, Maryland. Their offense isn't near what it was the first couple of years that he was there. And what's weird is they beat LSU, who actually has turned out to be a really good uh, team. And Utah has been a big disappointment this season. They were the favorites to win the Big 12 conference, and they just lost for the 3rd time this season and for the 3rd time in a row. Uh, this time to TCU, who's not even a very good team. They lost 13-7. Utah's offense without Cameron Rising is just garbage, and they have to move on from him though because he's just too delicate to play football anymore. But they're gonna be lucky probably now to even get a bowl game. And then Indiana sure is a for real team this year. They destroyed Nebraska yesterday, 56-7, and Nebraska, even though they're not a great team at all, they're an improved team from where they've been in a long time. And I was higher on Indiana than any of the magazines were by a lot before the season began, but Indiana's a lot better than even I thought they would be. They're going to be favored in all of the rest of their games except for the Ohio State game, and they're 7-0 right now. Indiana will probably go 11-1 this year, and that would put them in the college football playoff. They brought in that coach from James Madison, and he brought in a whole lot of his players from James Madison that I thought was going to work out for them, and it sure has worked out. And that transfer quarterback that they brought in, Rourke, I think is his name, actually came from a different place than James Madison, but he is one of the Big Ten's best quarterbacks this year. And I would still pick Ohio State to win the game against Indiana right now, but Indiana might be good enough to at least make it a ball game this year. Uh, Tennessee, though, I don't really think is a contender in the SEC, even though they beat Alabama. I think that mainly just looked bad for Alabama because Nico, I'm about to leave you, is a terrible quarterback for them. But that will be it with this video, and please subscribe and thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.